Kids are so unfettered, their imagination. That is, I wish that I had that kind of a wellspring of creativity to tap into.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Life of Dad Show. Here in the Life of Dad Show, we talk with athletes, actors, entrepreneurs, CEOs, musicians, entertainers who've all made a name for themselves, but the one thing that is most important to them is being a dad. In this week's episode, Jon Finkel and I are talking with author Steve Rushin. We talk about his books, we talk about fatherhood, and a whole lot more. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this interview, so let's get into it. Here is our interview with Steve Rushin. Enjoy. Hey everybody, Eddy and Jon Finkel here for the Life of Dad Show, and on the line we're very happy to have author Steve Rushin. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us, Steve. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you today. I know we've kind of reached out occasionally over Twitter, but I've been reading your column in SI for as long as I can remember, and from Pipe Man to Stingray Afternoons, your new book, and I just saw announced you have another one coming out, kind of a follow-up to that. I'm pumped. So one of the things I kind of wanted to just start with is, you have a pretty long career in terms of writing. And I just wanted to kind of, for viewers who are readers who are going to read this when we post it, we'll put some links into there. What are some of kind of your highlights before the book, some of your most memorable columns with Sports Illustrated?
Well, for Sports Illustrated, I hadn't left the country when I started at SI. Even though I grew up in Minnesota, I'd never been to Canada even. And so SI, in addition to, getting to write for this magazine I grew up reading, it was a job that allowed me to travel the world. I always say it was almost like a stint in the Navy. I got to see the world and I learned a trade, in my case, typing. But, I've been to all 7 continents for a sports magazine, including Antarctica with the swimsuit model Kate Upton 5 years ago. So it's been a privilege and an education, and, the stories. I've been doing it for 30 years. I've had, I'm sure a couple of thousand bylines at this point. So when you say you've been reading these for as long as you can remember, I feel like I've been writing for the magazine for as long as I can remember.
For a long time, Rick Riley had the back page and you had that kind of front of the book section. I always read, the joke was always like, a certain generation of dude kind of started reading magazines from the back. But I didn't go from the back to the front. I went from the back to the kind of almost front to where your column was.
Well, bless you. I appreciate that. Yeah, Riles was always happy that people read it, like a Japanese comic book or something, back to front. And I was always pleased to hear from people who read it front to back, so thank you.
Nice. Steve, you're just talking about how you got into it, and people make sure you go to steverushin.com to check out his books, just everything about him. And it's always hard to ask. It's almost like asking which is your favorite child. But was there a moment, when you first started in your career, you're like, oh, I have aspirations to do this or that. Has there something that you have accomplished or you have done that you feel like, it's almost like your MVP season or your MVP moment where you're just like, yes, I covered this. This is something that I wanted to do, or is it kind of hard to quantify with all the stuff you've been doing?
No, it's very easy. Just as I have a favorite of my 4 children. No, I did have a story where they're in school, so they can't hear me. I do have a story where, and it happened very early in my career, where I grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota. When I was a kid, the baseball and football stadium was in that town. Metropolitan Stadium was where the Twins and the Vikings played. The Twins were terrible in the 70s when I was a kid. The Vikings were great and went to 4 Super Bowls. And I worked at the stadium. I made the food that the vendors sold in the stands, all kinds of crazy stories about that in my memoir, Stingray Afternoons. And I would sit in the basement of our house in Bloomington and watch Twins games on TV when they were on the road and write game stories as if I were in the press box at Anaheim Stadium or at Kingdome in Seattle or wherever, on my mom's old Royal typewriter. And so when I started at SI out of college in 1988, in 1990, Peter Gammons left, and I was thrown onto one baseball story. And the next week, I got another baseball story. And after a year, I was suddenly, accidentally, the baseball writer at SI. And so in 1991, the Twins miraculously went to the World Series against the Braves. I was the baseball writer for SI. It was Game 7 against the Braves, this classic Game 7 where Jack Morris went 10 innings and shut out the Braves 1-0. It was played in Minneapolis, the Metrodome. I was living in New York City at the time, but I was staying in the house that I grew up in while I was in Minneapolis covering the World Series. And so after that Game 7, I drove my rental car on a Sunday night through the wild celebrating streets of Minneapolis to my childhood home, went into that same basement and stayed up all night in front of that same little portable TV and wrote the cover story for Sports Illustrated about the Twins winning the World Series. So, I mean, it really literally was a dream come true. It was what I, imagined myself doing as a kid, and somehow, miraculously, it worked out.
Get goosebumps right there just thinking about that story. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one of the things, in Stingray Afternoons that you talk a lot about is kind of how much sports, and even you mentioned baseball cards a lot, and kind of that stuff was interweaved throughout your childhood. When you started writing the stories for yourself, basically, did you have anyone that you read that guided you? Who were your favorites, the columns that you read maybe locally or nationally, who kind of made you think that you wanted to follow in their footsteps?
Well, there were local columnists in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, Patrick Royce in St. Paul, and then moved to Minneapolis. Jim Klobuchar in the Minneapolis paper, his daughter Amy is now a senator from Minnesota. And nationally, this was in the dark ages before the internet. My dad would travel for 3M, and he'd come back from New York or Los Angeles bringing a 3-day-old copy of the New York Times or the LA Times. And so I would tear out columns by Red Smith or Jim Murray or Mike Royko in the Chicago Tribune, and and just think that these guys, and particularly Jim Murray, get to make fun of people for a living. The kind of stuff that I do at the dinner table, trying to make my mom laugh by joking about my 4 siblings, Jim Murray could write in the LA Times, "The trouble with Spokane is there's nothing to do there after 10 in the morning, but it's a great place to have breakfast." And I thought, wow, you can be a smart aleck and make a living off of it. And that's when I knew that's what I wanted to do. I used to cut out those mascots, the New York Times logo, the Los Angeles Times logo, the Chicago Tribune, and tape them onto the desk, my homework desk in my bedroom. And I had a very strange idea that journalism was you wore like a fedora with a press card in your hat band. I think it was influenced heavily by All the President's Men and the Lou Grant Show, where he was an editor at the LA Times, or the LA Tribune. And 8 is Enough. The dad on 8 is Enough worked at the Sacramento, whatever the equivalent of the Sacramento Bee was, as a columnist. And so, weirdly, TV made me want to be a print journalist.
Grantland Rice, like the press box, when I grew up in Boston, so my group was the Bob Ryans and Shaughnessy's and all those guys growing up, and it just seemed like when they would go off the beat writer path and go into the columnist path, that's where all the fun seemed to be had. It sounds like you saw the same thing.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I had so much fun. I was stressed out and just really tearing what was decreasing amounts of hair out of my head when I was covering baseball. That was a very stressful beat. It was relentless week after week, February through into November, and I definitely wanted to do something else. But before I became a columnist, I was traveling all over the world, as I say, writing crazy stories that had only tenuous connections to sports. I looked for the northernmost golf course in the world in the Arctic Circle. I drove around the Nürburgring racetrack in Germany. Was closed because it became too dangerous for Formula One, but they still left it open for the general public to drive on and whatever they wanted. And, I love doing those stories. Played golf in the crater of an inactive volcano in Indonesia. And so I love doing those things. But what I liked about being a columnist, in addition to having control over what you wrote, and you weren't always taking an assignment, you were getting to choose what you covered and didn't cover, is I also wasn't on the road 39 weeks a year as I was prior to that. So, when you talk about the life of dad, I was never going to be a dad or a husband or anything other than the guy in seat 8B if I didn't get off the road occasionally. So that was nice to have a life as well.
Nice, and I appreciate you sharing that. And, a couple more questions before we get into fatherhood. With, writing and the way that things have evolved from newspapers, magazines, now to the internet and all this stuff, I think it's not only a good lesson for your kids, but someone maybe wanting to follow your footsteps because they're getting inspired by you. I used to work in radio before I started working here at Life of Dad, and you can kind of see like the writing on the wall, like, all right, things were moving to podcasts and things were getting syndicated and all that stuff. How did you kind of stay for you to keep on your career with everything the way it has changed? And what do you think is like the biggest, what was the biggest hurdle for you to, still keep on doing what you're doing, especially in an era where magazines were kind of, poo-pooed and like obviously people were checking things out on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like a blacksmith occasionally, like I'm doing some ancient, obsolete trade. Some people should come like Colonial Williamsburg and look at me through the window as I sit here on my computer typing up a book. There's no question that is, but part of it is it's what I love to do. Part of it is, I'm not equipped to do other things. My wife would kill me if I didn't mention that we do have a podcast now, she and I, called Ball and Chain. But for the most part, I haven't, branched out into a million other things. And what I do is, it requires solitude. It requires being content by yourself in a room for 6 or 8 hours for months on end if you're writing a book. And I asked my eldest daughter, I have 4 kids. The oldest is now 13. And when she was a few years ago, I said to her, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she thought about it. She genuinely thought about it and said, after about 30 seconds, she said, Dad, I don't want to be anything when I grow up. And I said, well, you have to be something. Everybody's something. And she said, very sweetly, she said, yeah, but Dad, you're not anything, and I want to be like you. So I totally get it. It was alternately devastating and, brought a tear to my eye because I sit here, on a laptop, something that she and her friends do, they're on their phone or on a, or on a laptop, and it looks like it might be, fun, but that I'm just killing time and surfing the internet or something when I'm actually writing. So I totally get it. My wife and I both work out of the house, and, someday our kids will be telling their psychiatrist, my parents were just around too much, not the opposite of what most kids say.
Right. No, that's a good segue to moving into the fatherhood side of things. You have your column I want to mention. The most recent one was honored in the Best American Sports Writing Series, and when I was reading it, it reminded me because my wife takes calls, so she's gone a lot. She's a physician, and so you mentioned in it that your wife's gone 100 nights a year and cooks dinner the other amount. So what is kind of a typical day for you like? Because I'm a writer as well, and I was curious how your day goes through when you're managing being the dad who's home while your wife's traveling with the deadline.
I used to count the hours till she got back. She'll be back in 27 hours. She'll be back in 26 and a half hours now. And you just can't live that way. And you have to kind of completely lean into it, embrace it, and grow to love it. So for me, when she's on the road, and she's kind of in a period now where she's traveling once a week to different conference media days. So last week she flew to San Francisco. She was in bed on a Wednesday morning. When I woke up, she was gone, had flown to San Francisco, and red-eyed immediately back after her event. So she was back the next morning. So she definitely tries to minimize the time away, not only because she'll miss the kids, but because she doesn't trust me to hold down the fort. So my only real shortcoming, I think, when she's away is I can't cook. I should have learned by now to cook. She always tells me I should be able to cook at least one, as she calls it, man food, like chili or something, and I can grill. But I feed the kids, frozen pizzas. We actually got a T-shirt and some coupons from Paul Newman's Frozen Pizzas because I feel like they're 1 millionth customer on my own or something, and microwaved hamburgers and I feed them junk and I'm not proud of that, but that's my biggest. Otherwise, I'm 4 hours in the car running into practices. All 4 kids now are at an age where they're playing sports. I used to read books. Now I actually carry a soccer ball in the car and I try to juggle a soccer ball while I'm waiting to pick them up someplace. So if you're driving through this part of Connecticut, you might see a 6'5" bald man, middle-aged guy, trying to break his own keepy-uppy record on the side of the road as, a way to not be completely sedentary while having to spend 4 hours in the car running to and from practices.
That's fantastic. I think now that we exchanged emails and stuff, I work from home. I've been the stay-at-home dad actually after I got out of radio, and then I came into writing for different outlets online, and then started working here at Life of Dad. I feel like I want to put you under my wing and give you some great recipes that you can do with your kids, because I find too, I've my oldest, she's 10, my youngest is 8. And there's certain times, especially with my 8-year-old, she's very picky with eating, but there's certain things that we make that's very easy, especially what you said with your kids your age, and they're doing everything and anything after school. So you need some quick, recipes. I feel like I want to send you some recipes, and you can not only show off to your wife, but your kids will be like, hey, we're making dinner together. And once they make dinner together, I have found that they will eat everything because they put their blood, sweat, and tears as well into it. So I want to help you out.
I would welcome that. Please do, because this weekend, I think I went to 6 soccer games this weekend, plus a high school volleyball game on Friday night. And I said to somebody at one of these games, I said, you're the first adult I've spoken to who wasn't mediated by a drive-through window speaker, because I think we had eaten meals on the go between games at least 2 drive-through windows that weekend. So I definitely need help.
And plus, here's a little dad hack. If you make meals, say like on a Sunday and a Monday or something like that, maybe double the ingredients so you have leftovers. So you kind of like stagnate the leftovers. Like, if you made meatloaf one day, then you have like a chicken dinner, and then you kind of like the next 2 days you go back and forth. And if your kids have helped you make it, they'll eat it with you. And so it's like, all right, so all you gotta do is use a microwave, and you're ready to go for the other 2 times.
So. That's good to know. I'll try it. My kids have actually said the words like, "Oh, not pizza again," or "Please, can we not go to McDonald's again?" And I thought, when I was a kid, it was like a thrill. I mean, it was like Christmas Day if you went to a fast food restaurant. Yeah. Boy, not for these guys. They're like, "Dad, can't we just get straight to the broccoli?" So they're like 17th century sailors who are craving fruits and vegetables. So I have to help them.
Modern kids with scurvy just from being in the minivan driving around too much.
Exactly. I'm going to bring in a crate of oranges and let them go to town.
Nice.
Do you have any kind of, for me, when I have a deadline and stuff like that, when I get going through it, it's getting starting for, so you get up, you have to get them on the bus, or if you drive them to school. Do you have any kind of quick little methods that you have to kind of shift from 4 kids out the door, backpacks, homework, everything done and gone, to I now only have, you mentioned before your wife being on the clock in terms of coming back. Now you have like the 7 hours till your kids come back on the clock. How do you kind of manage that?
You described it perfectly. It is that race against the clock once you've dropped the kids at school. In my case, I leave at 7 a.m. to drop my daughter at high school. I'm back before 8, and it's like yakety sax, flight of the bumblebees. You're running around trying to get whatever needs to be done before you can sit down and write. And I treat those 5-6 hours between, say, 9 and 3 when the kids get picked up as precious time. I don't go out to lunch hardly ever. I don't eat lunch sitting down hardly ever. I treat those 6 hours as my time to write and to work. And as a result, all kinds of other things suffer. Dry cleaning, or my wife pays the bills and all that, but I'm not great getting back on email and all that stuff, because I feel like I have a very limited time to do my work. And at 3 o'clock, I turn back into a pumpkin, and from 3 till 10, it's other stuff. And from 10 to 10:15 p.m., that's my time.
Yeah, till you fall. So that's the thing. I was curious about it, because the idea is like when you have that time, everything else has to go by the wayside. And I agree 100%, especially when that I have like that 1 hour, the 1 hour right before, the kids are going to get home or get off the bus, whatever you have to do, is when like you start thinking of all the things that you didn't do, or the part of the book that you wanted to get to that you didn't, or the calls you didn't get to. So it's impressive to get the memoir done and get all the new stuff done in that time frame.
Part of writing a memoir is wanting to relive my childhood, and that was made much easier by having children, and seeing what they go through helps remind you of what life was like, in my case, when you're 8, 10, 12, and 13, the ages of my kids. So, one summer day, my son, we were at my sister's cabin in Minnesota, said, "Dad," he was feeling his arms and chest, and said, "Dad, I have 28 bug bites." He was inventorying, his bug bites, and kind of rereading the day in Braille by feeling all the bug bites. And I remember so vividly doing that as a kid, but it's something that I wouldn't have recalled if I didn't have kids myself. I
have the similar thing where kids kind of see you at the computer, and as far as they know, you're just watching PJ Masks on the computer while they're doing the same thing. Right. They look at it as a device to be entertained. And when I say I'm writing a book or an article or working on something, it doesn't really compute. Do you have it? Are either any of your kids into writing? And if they are, do you have any ways to get them into being a better writer or a better reader? Or how do you kind of keep them into the field that we're all in?
Well, we're blessed. Our house is full of books, and our kids love to read, and I read every night with my 10-year-old son. We've read. He stacks up the books that we've read. It's like a bar graph of our achievement, and we put them on his bookshelf. It's a trophy case. He can count the books that he's read. I read with our 12-year-old daughter, and our younger one and our oldest one read on their own. So we're really lucky in that regard. And occasionally the kids would ask if they could use my laptop, and I'd say sure. And thinking that they were on nickjr.com or something, I would come in and my son would shut the laptop like he was doing something wrong. And later, much later, I found a file on my laptop, and he had written a story about it was called Jackie Robinson, a baseball hero, and he had written a 6-paragraph story that was just moved me to tears about Jackie Robinson. And our oldest she'll write occasional stories, and our 8-year-old now is on Book Creator, is writing stories, and they're so kids are so unfettered, their imagination, that is, I wish that I had that kind of a wellspring of creativity to tap into. They write in a way that there are no rules, and it's funny when we're talking about how do you segue into your workday from running errands and all that, and you treat that time as super precious. I do have students who will ask me, how do you deal with writer's block? And I kind of laugh, like, you can't afford to have writer's block when you've got 4 kids and a limited amount of time. I always say only writers could make up writer's block. You don't call somebody to fix your sink and the guy says, I've got plumber's block, I can't come today. If you want to get paid, you better do the work that day.
Yeah, they're so precious with their writer's block time.
Exactly.
Nice. Thank you very much for sharing that, Steve. Now we got the Life of Dad quick 5. When you guys aren't going everywhere, for this practice and that practice, do you guys have a favorite family movie you all love to watch together?
The kids love movie night. Our eldest favorite movie is Sandlot, so all the kids have loved that. They've plowed through the sports movies. Mighty Ducks became a big one last year. They plowed through that trilogy. And just this past the holiday weekend, they watched the first 2 Indiana Jones movies. They'd never seen them before. They love kind of the classics of my era. So they thought Jaws was hilarious because the special effects are so bad in their view. It terrified me when I saw it as a kid. Of course, E.T., some of the kids thought E.T. looked, cheesy. My son is still terrified of E.T., who was a nice character, obviously, but E.T. freaks him out. And when they were younger, Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, we watched with the 2 oldest girls now over and over and over again, and the soundtrack played in the car. And I would say a real crowd pleaser that we watched recently for maybe the 10th time was the recent version of the Muppets movie, The Muppets with the Brett McKenzie movie, the music, because my son has also gotten into Flight of the Conchords, some of the less inappropriate songs with me. He thinks they're hilarious.
Nice. Love that very much. It's funny you mentioned E.T. and Indiana Jones. My friend showed me a meme, and I've seen it before because I'm a Star Wars geek, but it was in Raiders of the Lost Ark or Temple of Doom. While Indiana's looking at something, you see hieroglyphics of C-3PO and R2-D2, and there's this theory that E.T., Indiana Jones, and Star Wars are all connected, where when Han Solo's in Carbonite, what he's dreaming is the whole Indiana Jones sketch. And then when in E.T., when he sees Yoda and E.T. goes to him during Halloween, that he recognizes Yoda, but he doesn't realize that it's not Yoda because it's a costume. And E.T. is in one of either the Phantom Menace or a bunch of E.T.s are in Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones when they have the Senate meeting. So it's kind of cool that you mentioned that. I was talking to one of my good friends about that last night, how that whole Steven Spielberg and George Lucas world is all connected.
Well, you've sent me down a rabbit hole because my son is so into Star Wars, and so it's on all the time. His sisters aren't into it. He is. My ambition next time I'm in L.A., my friend out there, Sam Farmer with the L.A. Times, promises to take me on a tour of Spielbergia, all that suburban area where they shot, E.T. and all that stuff. So I will be following your unified theory of India and Star Wars now. Thank you.
Nice, very cool. And too, you talked about Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is coming back. You saw that one, right?
Oh yeah, Emily Blunt. Our oldest daughter's birthday is Christmas Day, and she has already exacted a promise from me that I will take her and just her on her birthday on Christmas. We'll leave the house and we'll see the new Mary Poppins.
Nice. Just you and me, Dad. That's it.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a favorite song, or was there a band you couldn't wait to introduce your kids to?
My eldest daughter, when I was writing the memoir of growing up in the 70s, I had 70s on 7 playing constantly just to kind of re-immerse myself in that era. And so our oldest daughter became a big fan of not only 70s music, but specifically 70s light rock, Seals and Crofts, and England Dan and John Ford Coley. This is not a passion shared by her classmates, I promise you. And so we would put her to bed at night playing James Taylor's greatest hits as kind of a lullaby album. And James Taylor was here in Hartford, where we live in Connecticut, and I took her. This was 2 summers ago, and James Taylor announced that there would be a 15-minute intermission. He doesn't like it, but the venue makes him do it, so he can go to the bathroom. But I'm just going to go backstage and look at my watch, he said. So we went to the bathroom. When we came back, he was sitting on the edge of the stage, and people were surrounding him, and he appeared to be chatting with them. My daughter said, "Can I go up there?" Sure. She took my phone to get a selfie, and when she came back, I lost her in the footlights. When she came back, she was in tears, and I said, "What happened?" She said, "I asked James Taylor if he would take a selfie with me, and he didn't understand what I said, and he took your phone out of my hands, and she showed me, and he signed the phone with a Sharpie and his autograph. And I said, "Well, that's great. Why are you crying?" She said, "You're not mad? He signed your phone." I said, "No, this is fantastic." So I took the phone case off and gave it to her, and she now has a signed rubber James Taylor phone case that is a kind of trophy of her love of 70s music.
Nice. That's fantastic. Yes. Love that. Describe the perfect family vacation. Where would it be?
Well, our holy grail is, whether the kids want to do it or not, is I'd love to take a long station wagon car trip if I could find a station wagon. We haven't done it yet. We've been had some great vacations. My dad's 80th birthday, we went to South Africa on a safari. He'd planned it for 2 years, 26 of us. And on the flight back, we took from Johannesburg to Atlanta, the longest commercial flight in existence, 17 hours, 6 hours into it. 6 hours into it, my then 11-year-old barfed on my shoes. I was in the middle seat and coach. My video screen in front of me on the seat in front of me didn't work. And so I thought, if we can survive this, we can survive anything. And it has sort of made us feel bulletproof vacation-wise. So the vacation that I really want to take is I want to recreate the trip that I took when I was 10 to California, flying to San Francisco, driving down the California coast. My sister threw up in the car. My dad used his boxer shorts to clean it up. And in family lore anyway, he threw that off into the Big Sur, and it floated across the Pacific and landed in some South Pacific island, but all the way down the coast to San Diego. Not so much because, the kids will appreciate it, but I know I will have deja vu at every stop along the way.
Excellent. Awesome. And last two are kind of like book and sports related. Favorite book you read as a kid was?
Favorite book I read as a kid was Heaven is a Playground by Rick Tellender, an account of pickup basketball in the summer of 1974 in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. We stole it from the public library. I have it on my bookshelf here. It was officially withdrawn on Amnesty Day, and I had Rick, who then I met, when I started working for Sports Illustrated because he wrote for SI. I had Rick sign it, but first he begged me to return it to the library so other people could read it. I refused, and it's on my bookshelf now.
Nice, love that. And lastly, again, this is probably maybe a tough question for you with everything you've experienced, but best sporting event to attend live is? People ask me that frequently, and I tell them my favorite thing might be the British Open golf because there's no limit on the number of people they allow in. Kids get in free. Half the people, or more than half the people, never even turn to face the golf. They have their back to the golf. If you're at St. Andrews, you're looking out to the sea. They have bars all over the course. People are drinking heavily, and it's just a fun sort of party atmosphere, which you don't often associate with golf. But I love that, and I also love covering the World Cup in France, the Olympics. There are a lot of great events, and but there's something about British Open golf that I really, really enjoy. Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time, Steve. People, make sure you follow Steve on Twitter at Steve Rushin. Go to steverushin.com to pick up all his books and also pre-order his next book that's coming out. Continued success with everything you got going on in the future, sir.
Same to you guys. I really enjoy the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening to the Life of Dad Show. You know where to find us, lifeofdad.com, and on Twitter and Facebook.